그래서 말하자면 저는 이미 수출도 많이 해봤고 세계의 팬들도 많이 있어 보았고 그리고 그분들이 정말 많이 사랑해 주셨어요. 사실 제가 세계적인 소설가가 된다고 해도 그 정도의 피드백이나 사랑을 받기는 좀 어렵지 않을까 생각을 하는데 그래서 어떤 면에서 충족이 다 됐다고 해야 되나? 그건 좋은 것 같아요. 낯설게 하기 기법인데 사실 SF에서는 굉장히 흔히 쓰는 기법이고요. 흔히 SF에서 외계인이나 이종족이 나올 때 정말 이제 외계인이 있다고 생각하고 쓰는 경우도 있지만 보통은 우리 자신을 객관적인 시선으로 보기 위한 외부의 시선을 가정할 때가 많거든요. 그래서 현재 지구나 현재 나라나 현재 제도 하에서는 볼 수 없는 그런 시선을 가정하는 거죠. 제가 학교 다닐 때 사이코 드라마를 했는데 사이코 드라마의 기본 기법 중에 하나가 그거예요. 주인공이 앉아서 자기 이야기를 하면은 잠깐 일어나 보라고 한 다음에 연기자가 와서 그 주인공이 했던 행동하고 말을 그대로 따라해요. 그걸 옆에서 보라고 하거든요. 그러면 그것만으로도 지금까지 살아오면서 못 봤던 문제가 객관적으로 보이게 되는 때가 많아요. 아마 SF에서 그 기법도 비슷한 기법이라고 생각해요. 사실 사랑을 많이 받는다고 느끼고 뭐 제가 뭐라고 소설을 쓸 뿐인데 그것만으로도 참 많이 사랑해 주시는구나 생각하고 소설을 쓰면서 생겨난 인연도 많고 또 그 인연이 좋은 방식으로 이어지기도 하고요. 그래서 참 좋은 직업이구나 생각하고 늘 감사하고 계속 감사하며 살겠다고 생각하죠. 사실 제가 SF를 쓰려고 해서 SF를 쓴 게 아니라 제가 쓰고 싶은 걸 마음대로 썼더니 그걸 독자들이 SF라고 해석을 해주셨다고 생각하거든요. 그런데 만약에 내가 쓰고 싶은 것을 마음대로 쓰지 않고 어떤 유행하는 소설에 맞추거나 그냥 받아들여지는 소설에 맞춰서 썼다면은 제가 여기 있을 것 같지도 않고 어쩌면 아예 작가도 못했을 것 같아요. 그래서 여러분들이 쓰고 싶은 소설이 꼭 SF가 아니어도 좋으니까 자기가 쓰고 싶은 소설을 자유롭게 쓸 수 있으면 좋겠습니다. 사실 저는 영미권 SF 독자들은 SF를 다르게 읽지 않을까 하는 생각이 있었는데 리뷰를 보면 한국 독자 반응하고 많이 비슷하더라고요. 좋아하시는 부분도 비슷하고 어려워하는 부분도 비슷하고 사실 우리가 영미권 문학을 가져와서 읽을 때도 사실 비슷하게 읽잖아요. 아무 어려움 없이. 그래서 소설을 쓸 때 크게 개의치 않고 한국 독자들에게 맞추어 써도 마찬가지로 세계 독자들도 비슷하게 읽겠구나 하는 생각이 들었죠. 작품이 좋으면 수출된다고 믿으면 좋은데 제 느낌은 그렇지가 않은 것 같고 사실은 문학이 세계 문학이 되는 데는 나라의 힘이 크게 작용한다고 생각해요. 사실 문학은 자본이 전혀 들지 않는 예술이기 때문에 아마 세계 어느 나라에나 훌륭한 작가들이 있을 거고 단지 우리가 그들을 접하지 못할 뿐일 거라고 생각해요. 한국 문학이 지금 수출이 많이 되는 것도 다른 문화가 수출이 되는 것도 역시 나라의 힘이 조금 더 세져서라는 생각이 들어요. 그래서 사실 이 국격이라는 것이 경제적인 것만 있는 것이 아니라 사실 세계 시민으로서 어떻게 행동하는가, 인권이나 환경이나 난민이나 인종 문제에 대해서 어떻게 대응하는가 이것도 작용하지 않는가 생각하고요. 네, 국격이 더 높아지기를 기원합니다.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, May 21st, here in South Korea. Overseas Korean voters are actively seeking to exercise their civic duty as polling stations enter a second day in over 100 countries, while major presidential candidates here continue their campaigns around the Greater Seoul region. Meanwhile, at the United Nations on Tuesday local time, two North Korean defectors currently residing here in South Korea detailed their troubling tales of rampant human rights abuses across the border in North Korea. U.S. President Donald Trump delves into details about his Golden Dome missile defense shield for the U.S., estimated to cost $175 billion and to be fully functional within his term. Hello and welcome to the Daily Report. The political events here in South Korea in recent times appear to be galvanizing Korean voters overseas to exercise their civic duty, as quite a few travel long distances to cast their ballot for the leader they believe will work to move the nation forward. Our Moon Hae-ryun reports.
Sung Jin-ok, a Korean national living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, drove 4 hours to a polling station in Virginia. Arriving at daybreak to cast her vote, she said that she had never felt such an urgent need to vote in all her 16 years of living overseas.
There is something deeply moving about stamping my vote. I used to think my vote was too small to matter, so I often gave up. But this time, I hope it becomes a vote for real change.
With overseas voting for South Korea's presidential election now underway, Korean nationals across the United States are heading to polling stations in what they describe as a hopeful, even emotional act of civic duty. For many, this election feels more personal than ever.
I hope this election brings us closer together, a society united through democracy.
Meanwhile, others cast their ballots thinking of future generations.
I want our children to grow up in a society where responsible leaders step up.
The overseas voting period began Tuesday and runs to Sunday, taking place across 118 countries, according to the National Election Commission. A total of 258,000 overseas voters registered for this year's election, which is roughly a 14% increase in numbers compared to the previous election. Overseas voters in Asia account for the largest bloc at around 129,000 registered voters, followed by the United States and Europe. When heading out to the ballot booths, voters must bring photo ID. Those who have emigrated or acquired permanent residency must also present proof they remain solely Korean nationals, such as visa documents and permanent residency cards. Requirements for each country of residence are available on the respective embassy or consulate websites. In an effort to improve accessibility for Korean citizens living abroad, the NEC has installed new polling stations, such as those in Lithuania, Estonia, and Luxembourg. Until now, Korean residents in Lithuania had to travel to Poland to vote, while those in Estonia made a 2.5-hour ferry trip to Finland. As the overseas voting window continues ahead of the domestic election period, many voters say they're not just casting a ballot, but expressing their hopes for a better, more unified country. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Turning now to the latest on the campaign trail, Liberal Party contender Lee Jae-myung is addressing his supporters in the city of Incheon today. I have our political correspondent Shin Ha-young standing by live with details. Ha-young, it's good to have you on. Do fill us in.
I'm currently in Incheon's Gov't district, where Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung has just arrived and has begun delivering a speech seeking support from voters here. And he's continuing his campaign in the Seoul metropolitan area for the third consecutive time, this time in the city of Incheon. And before coming to Seoul, he held a rally in Namdong-gu district. Take a listen.
The sea takes in both murky and clean water. Isn't that the spirit of unity in Incheon? Winning in Incheon is what makes it a true victory. Will you help make that happen?
Incheon holds special significance for Lee, as it was a stepping stone in his political comeback after narrowly losing to former President Yoon Suk-yeol in the 2022 presidential election. And Lee won a by-election in Korea-U.S, then became party leader and won the primary to run for president again. And after finishing his rally in Seoul, he will wrap up his Wednesday rallies in Korea-U.S, the constituency he represents in the National Assembly. And Lee is expected to thank the people of Gyeonggu for supporting his comeback. He aims to win votes by sharing his economic vision for Incheon, a global gateway city with an airport and port, focusing on logistics and the bio industry.
Hayoung, I hear he also shared a few pledges for our furry friends. Do tell us more.
Sure, Sunny. He laid out pet-friendly policy pledges ahead of today's rally. And in a social media post today, he promised to enact the so-called Basic Animal Welfare Act and work to create a government agency dedicated to promoting animal welfare. And he also pledged to reduce pet care costs, especially for veterinary services, by setting standard fees and promoting the expansion of pet insurance. He also addressed the issue of stray cats. Take a listen.
Since more than 25% of people have pets, we need appropriate policies for them. On issues like stray cats, where opinions differ, we should find ways to coexist without causing problems for others.
Additionally, he pledged to prevent animal abuse and abandonment by introducing a policy that bans offenders from owning animals for a set period. That's all for this hour. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Hayoung, thank you for that coverage of the Liberal camp. Up next, we turn to the Conservative camp, whose contender Kim Moon-soo continues his campaign in the Greater Seoul region. For details, I have our Kim Do-yeon joining me live. Do-yeon, welcome back. And where are you joining us from today?
Sunny, I'm in Dongducheon City in Gyeonggi-do province, around 50 kilometers from central Seoul. Now, Kim is set to appear behind me in any moment now, and he's making his way over as he started the day in the northwest of Gyeonggi-do and has moved clockwise direction. Now, as he does, he's reminding Gyeonggi-do residents that it was during his 2 terms as Gyeonggi-do governor that the GTX Express Railway system, which connects Seoul and Gyeonggi-do, started, and now he's pledging to expand it even further. Take a listen.
I promise you, I'll make sure anyone can travel anywhere within an hour. I'll deliver a transportation revolution.
Now, as I said, the area he's covering also borders North Korea, with a large portion of the land left undeveloped due to restrictions related to security and the environment. He pledged to lift these to host different institutions and companies to create more jobs in the area.
Also, Do-yeon, I understand Kim remains committed to coaxing his conservative rival into a coalition.
That's right, Sunny. Kim repeated his message earlier in the day. His point continues to be that the merger with Reform Party is his means to change the landscape of the current election, and he's apparently hopeful. Take a listen.
As for a dramatic turnaround, there's candidate Lee Jun-seok, who once served as our party leader and is now running independently. I believe that in the end, he and I will merge our campaigns and that he could play a key role in leading us to victory in this presidential race. I'm hopeful things will work out.
But Lee Jun-seok is still publicly rejecting the idea. Still, the outrage continues. PPP lawmaker Ahn Cheol-soo visited Lee on the campaign trail in an apparent attempt to open dialogue. Momentum is building, though. Former Justice Minister and PPP primary runner-up Han Dong-hoon began campaigning for Kim yesterday, though they haven't appeared together yet. Han made clear that he wouldn't hit the trail unless the party distanced itself from impeached ex-president Yoon Suk-yeol. Now that Yoon has left the party, Han appears to be on board. And add to the distancing, just about an hour ago, PPP interim leader Kim Yong-tae publicly apologized for controversies surrounding former First Lady Kim Keon Hee. After his debate proposal for First Lady prospects was rejected, he urged the DP to suggest their own format, saying vetting should still happen. That's the latest from Dongducheon. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, and thank you for that coverage of the Conservative camp. Also on the campaign trail, Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok has rejected yet again calls for a coalition by PPP contender Kim Moon-soo. Speaking here in Seoul earlier on this Wednesday, he brushed aside attempts by the main Conservative camp to seek a merger. He currently ranks third in public polls and has shared hopes to see his standing rise after the remaining 2 live TV debates. Later in the day, he headed to Seongnam, where he sat down with students at Gachon University and toured Seongnam Medical Center. At the United Nations on Tuesday local time, 2 North Korean defectors detailed troubling tales of rampant human rights abuses in North Korea and during the flight to freedom. Our correspondent Kim Jung-seok covers their testimonies and more.
The first session of its kind at the General Assembly featured live testimonies from North Korean defectors. Kim Eun-ju shared her story of escape and the trauma she faced.
On our first night in China, my 40-year-old sister was kidnapped, sexually abused, and left on the roadside. Later, my mother, sister, and I, all of us, were sold for only 2,000 won, less than $300. This tragedy is not only my family's story. Many others face the same brutal reality under the North Korea regime.
Kang Gyuri, a relatively recent defector, spoke about many still in the North.
There are still billions of North Koreans who have no access to any information about the outside world, who believe that they have no choice but to live under 3 generations of the Kim dynasty's personality culture.
This point was also highlighted by UN official Ilse Brands-Carries.
The laws carry severe punishments, including the death penalty in some cases. The internet is not available. Similarly, freedom of movement is extremely restricted.
Also discussed were the global security implications of North Korea's human rights violations.
The DPRK is exporting instability and violence to the Middle East and to Europe. And the root cause of this is the human rights violations that the DPRK perpetrates.
Elizabeth Selman, UN Special Rapporteur on North Korean human rights, tied militarization to more exploitation, citing troops sent to Russia.
As the DPRK expands its extreme militarization policies, it exacerbates the extensive reliance on forced labor and quota systems.
North Korea's permanent representative to the UN, Kim Sung, rejected the claims, accusing Western nations of politicizing the issue.
It is shocking that such a meeting is convened going against universal will of the international community.
Despite Pyongyang's rejection of the claims, Tuesday's session has once again brought North Korea's human rights situation to the global forefront. Kim Jung-seok, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea on this Wednesday, a 30-member team of South Korean and American officials have begun excavation work to recover the remains of soldiers who died during the Korean War. According to the Defense Ministry here, the latest mission in Mungyong City, Gyeongsang-buk-do Province, will last 6 weeks. This marks the 16th excavation effort by the two countries since the year 2000, underscoring their continued commitment to their alliance and to the sacrifice of their soldiers. Beyond borders, U.S. President Donald Trump has shared an ambitious and costly plan to protect America from missile assaults. Our Lee Sing-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced on Tuesday his plan for a missile defense program dubbed Golden Dome. The multi-layered system would allow for U.S. weapons to be put into space for the first time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here in the Oval Office, one of the great places of the world, as we make a historic announcement about the Golden Dome missile defense shield. That's something we want. And Ronald Reagan wanted it many years ago, but they didn't have the technology. But it's something we're going to have. We're going to have it at the highest.
The Golden Dome will include ground and space-based capabilities that can detect and destroy missiles at all major stages of a potential attack. Trump said that he had promised the American people that he would build a cutting-edge missile defense shield to protect the U.S. from the threat of foreign missile attacks. However, the ambitious plan also comes with a massive price tag.
I'm also pleased to report that the One Big Beautiful Bill will include $25 billion for the Golden Dome to help construction get underway. That's the initial sort of a down deposit. And we have probably, you're talking about, General, we're talking about $175 billion total cost of this when it's completed.
However, earlier this month, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that deploying and operating just the space-based interceptors of the defense system could cost up to $542 billion over the next 20 years. Still, citing the increasingly sophisticated threats from North Korea, Russia, and China, Trump said the system could be operational within 3 years, as he named General Michael Gutlein, Vice Chief of Operations for the U.S. Space Force, to oversee the Golden Dome project. Lee Jun-seok, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, trade officials from South Korea and the U.S. counterparts in Washington, D.C. opened a fresh round of tariff talks on Tuesday, local time. On the agenda are 6 key matters, including trade balance, non-tariff measures, and economic security. Now, this is the second round of technical talks and likely be the last ahead of the political transition here in South Korea as a new government takes office on June 4th. South Korea is seeking lower tariffs, while the U.S. seeks greater market access. The Finance Ministry here will mobilize policy funds to counter U.S. tariff-related trade repercussions. Policy funds totaling 28.6 trillion won, or over $20 billion will be earmarked for affected businesses to stabilize their operations, to diversify their markets, and for their facility investment. Acting Finance Minister Kim Bum-seok also spoke of a support plan for product-specific tariffs, including those on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, in the near future. Findings for the first 3 weeks of May show a slump in Korean shipments overseas. According to the Korea Customs Service on this Wednesday, exports from May 1st to the 20th were down 2.4% on year. By destination, shipments to the U.S. market slipped in light of tariff-related repercussions amid a sharp decline in auto exports. Korean shipments to the EU market also lost ground. This latest drop in exports comes after 3 straight months of growth through April. Korea's defense industry is seeking to make strategic strides in strengthening regional security both at sea and in the air, and its efforts are on full display at a regional exhibition. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung files this report.
K-Defense looks to expand its realm to Southeast Asia. The Langkawi International Maritime and Aerospace Exhibition 2025, the largest exhibition of its type in Southeast Asia, kicked off on Tuesday. Among the Korean defense companies taking part is LIG Next One, with the South China Sea disputes propelling Southeast Asian states to strengthen their naval capabilities. LIG Next One is showcasing its Haegung, ship-to-air guided missile defense system, hoping to attract buyers such as the Malaysian Navy. Many officials from other countries such as Vietnam and even Saudi Arabia also show their interest.
We are currently focusing our promotional efforts on a multi-layered air defense system. In the long term, we plan to expand into unmanned systems, space, cyber, and AI technologies.
Korea Aerospace Industries was visited by the Malaysian Prime Minister. KAI signed a deal with Malaysia in 2023 to export 18 FA-50 fighter jets. And with the very first one expected to be delivered next year, KAI is pushing for the second phase of the procurement project as Malaysia plans to acquire an additional 18 aircraft. The exhibition gave a peek into where K-Defense stands in the global market. European missile firm MBDA had a mock-up of KAI's FA-50 and KF-21 with its own missiles loaded, promoting these to Malaysia. While sharing ideas of how MBDA could cooperate with KAI, the technical executive cited advanced technology and rapid delivery as some of the South Korean defense industry's strengths.
It's how rapidly you can bring those capabilities to market. KF-21 as an aircraft is a fine example of going from a concept phase all the way to something that's actually flying, integrating modern advanced missiles like Meteor on there, and actually doing test firings and maiden flights with it.
Based on the credibility it has earned, K-Defense aims to explore more opportunities in the global defense market, starting in Malaysia. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Langkawi.
Meanwhile, for those of you here, every Thursday evening and sometimes on Tuesdays until the end of June, Capitals Hall offers an outdoor workout event aimed at building a broader sense of fitness. Our Choi Soo-young was there.
As K-pop star Rosie's song Apa트 plays, people start copying the dance moves. This is Seoul Plaza, and right now it's K-pop dance practice time. Following the dancer's lead, everyone enjoys the moves and gets soaked in sweat.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, yeah, we were not expecting to come here, but I've heard the song a lot. I've heard it on the radio and stuff, so it's nice that we can kind of connect to it too, especially because it's in English.
Taking place in the evening under the clear spring sky, the event is particularly popular among office workers.
I love it. I usually don't have much time with my baby to have fun because of work, but thanks to this event, we're having a great time.
The 2025 Seoul Plaza exercising is held every Thursday and some Tuesdays until June 26th, starting at 7 p.m. The events offer fun and easy group workout programs for anyone, whether they are a complete newbie or they just love to exercise. Each session will feature a different activity such as Zumba, yoga class, or cheerleading, so participants can try something new every time. In one corner of the plaza, visitors can also try sports that are hard to find in everyday life in South Korea, such as lacrosse and badminton, which is similar to badminton, but played with table tennis-style paddles. Now in its third year, the event drew around 10,000 people last year. During the event, a coaching program with fitness experts allows participants to get one-on-one advice on posture correction and diet. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Today is Seoman on the traditional calendar, which means it is entering the summer. It is hotter than yesterday across the country. Seoul and many areas recorded the hottest morning in May ever. Even during the day, Seoul rose up to 28 degrees Celsius, and with high humidity, it feels like 30 degrees. There will be showers everywhere due to the atmospheric instability during the night. The expected amount is 5 to 40 millimeters. Showers could be accompanied by gusty winds, thunder, lightning, and hail in some areas. Rain will begin again at dawn tomorrow in central areas and from the morning in southern areas. Most of this rain will subside by the afternoon. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 20 degrees. Daejeon and Gwangju at 21 degrees. Highs will be very similar to today's, with Seoul at 27 degrees, Chuncheon at 25 degrees. Summer-like heat will ease up a bit from Friday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Our panel session is up next, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.
제21대 대통령 재외선거.
세계 어느 곳에 있어도
내가 국가대표라는 마음으로
누구보다 땀 흘리죠. 지금이 국가대표임을
보여줄 기회. 대한민국 국민의 권리.
대한민국 국민의 의무.
반드시 투표합니다. 국가를 위한 대통령 투표. 제21대 대통령 재외선거. 중앙선거관리위원회.
2025 celebrates the 80th anniversary of liberation. A place filled with culture, history, and diverse experiences. This is the Independence Hall of Korea. Upholding the values of the independence movement, and together with the whole nation, we will make Korea great. The Independence Hall of Korea.
A South Korean trade delegation is in the U.S. for more technical talks on tariffs this week as it seeks to set a productive stage for a mutually beneficial deal once the political transition here at home is complete. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Wednesday, May 21st here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we revisit the Trump administration's trade policy and its broader implications as a delegation of Korean officials are in the U.S. for more technical discussions on tariffs. For this, I have Stephen Borick with Japanese news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, as always, welcome back.
Always a pleasure.
I also have freelance journalist David Cox live on the line over in the UK. David, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Great to be back on the show.
Right. Here in the studio, we will start. Stephen, so the Korean trade delegation is over in the U.S. following threats of full reciprocal tariffs by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on American trade partners who do not negotiate, and I'm quoting, in good faith. Let's start with these remarks and their implications.
Well, basically what it appears as though Bessent is doing is depicting the current step back from the 25% blanket tariffs as a kind of temporary reprieve that is contingent on what he said of the U.S.'s negotiating partners as operating in good faith. There's a few things we could say here. I think it's important to note that he did not specify what exactly he meant by negotiating in good faith. The generally accepted definition of what it means to negotiate in good faith is that you do not promise things that you don't intend to follow through on, that you consider the other side's position, that you make an earnest effort to come to an amicable agreement. I think by all indications, we can safely assume that the South Korean side would be operating in accordance with those principles. These are all professional negotiators, and they have a long-standing alliance and relationship of mutual respect with the United States. But I mean, the kind of risk is that, as I alluded to earlier, Bessent did not say what exactly would amount to operating in good faith and on what basis Washington could later accuse South Korea or any other negotiating partner of having not operated in good faith. It's a kind of unfalsifiable claim. It's kind of subjective, and that is hanging over these talks. I mean, the kind of good side, the indication of possible positive momentum is that these are more detailed talks that are a kind of follow-up to some kind of exploratory discussions that took place between officials from the two sides at the APEC meeting in Jeju Island last week. And so I believe some of the things that they want to discuss are balanced trade, non-tariff measures, economic security, digital trade, and a few other things. And I guess what they will be endeavoring to do is seeing potential areas of overlap and where the two sides can complement each other. I mean, the kind of risky subtext of this is that there is also the possibility that the Trump administration is really what their motivation is maybe they are not operating in good faith themselves. Maybe they are really just seeking to squeeze concessions from the South Korean side. We don't really know. So we'll have to wait and see what they come up with.
Right. Speaking about what the Trump administration wants from South Korea, CNBC claims that Mr. Trump is seeking a one-stop shopping deal with South Korea, which would come at a cost. First, what is meant by a one-stop shopping deal, and what cost are pundits speaking about?
Well, let's be clear. Trump used that wording himself. This is not this in a post on social media. He said that he wanted a one-stop shopping agreement with South Korea. This is not just something that this was not CNBC's wording. That's important to flag. I mean, it's shopping is a curious choice of words. It does kind of imply that Trump is operating with, like I said, objectives in his head, things that he's trying to get, that he maybe sees this as an opportunity to benefit in some way. I think what he was saying was he wants to address the trade relationship with South Korea. He also wants to discuss the issue of the costs of stationing U.S. troops in South Korea. This has been a big thing for him for a long time. I think even before he was president, he was kind of depicting American allies as taking unfair advantage of the U.S. military, and instead of developing their own defense capacity, relying on U.S. troops to keep them safe in their own regions, where the U.S. also has interests, of course. And then Bennett came out and said that this is just kind of the way that he does business. But there's a long distance between this kind of rhetoric and the granular bureaucratic reality according to which these systems function. South Korea and the U.S. have an agreement called an SMA, which governs how they manage the hosting of troops. And they made sure to renew that in November of last year before the new administration in the U.S. took power. And that's good until 2030. And so I've spoken to experts on this, and they've always been careful to caution that Trump cannot just say these things and expect them to happen in an expeditious manner. There's all kinds of legal and bureaucratic hurdles that keep these kinds of systems in place. So Trump is well known as a very transactional kind of guy. He's well known as a showman, as someone who has a flair for coming up with a catchy turn of phrase in front of a camera or online. So we'll have to see just how serious he is about approaching the relationship with South Korea in this way. The other thing, before I wrap up, the other point that I would just conclude is that Trump's major foreign policy objective is dealing with China. And if no one has told him this already, surely he has people in his advisory camp that are going to tell him that the U.S. presence in South Korea is really quite important for maintaining U.S. interests in this part of the world in terms of economic security, in terms of shipping lanes and all the other things that global commerce needs to function. So I do wonder if we might see a continuation of this kind of back and forth strategy where Trump lobs a more aggressively worded statement and then maybe moves back a little bit later as things calm down.
Right, and staying with this particular subject, David, scholars here believe that linking defense costs and trade initiatives may ultimately hurt the credibility of American commitment to security here in this part of the world. Speaking as a journalist, observing the events here from there in Europe, David, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I agree. As Stephen said, this has been a favored topic of Trump for some time as part of his America First agenda. He's been banging on about it for kind of quite some time. I mean, it's quite possible that he is just purely kind of posturing, he's kind of playing on the ongoing South Korean insecurities over North Korea. And so, I mean, that's why he's kind of perhaps bringing this subject up as a means of leverage in ongoing trade talks. But, I think it does definitely still hurt the image of the US across Asia in general. I mean, earlier this year, I think Singapore came out with quite a strongly worded statement saying that the US is starting to be viewed a bit more as a landlord seeking rent rather than the great disruptor it has been in the past. So I think that maybe Trump is perhaps sort of unaware of that a lot of his posturing could, definitely harm America's influence in the region. There's been quite a bit of discussion that the image of the US in Asia has already been deteriorating for a number of years, even before Trump took office. So I think it risks the US being perceived as less credible, less of a sort of a kind of an influential figure in the region. And I think on the other hand, it does risk further strengthening the influence of China across the rest of Asia in general.
David, beyond South Korea's trade talks with the U.S., the UK was the first to strike a deal with the U.S. Could you tell us a bit about the deal, the tariff deal signed between the UK and the U.S. and the response to it by pundits there?
So like everyone, I mean, we've been reeling quite a lot from the tariffs, the great tariff shock, particularly as the UK economy isn't in a great place at the moment. We've got rising inflation, unemployment. We're still feeling the big kind of economic aftermath of COVID. So I think Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, he felt pressure to strike a deal with Trump. And to kind of summarize simply, we've basically struck deals on cars, steel and beef, while American farmers have been given access to sell food in the UK. That's a major coup for Trump. That's never happened really before. So the Prime Minister here has been bigging up the deal. He claims it will save thousands of jobs. And there are signs that businesses are relieved, particularly the UK car industry, because we export quite a lot of cars to the US. However, in some ways, it's not a great deal. So the US still has like a baseline 10% tariff on UK goods, and that's remaining unchanged. And so because of that, there's a few other pundits who are saying they're not convinced we perhaps should have moved quite so quickly to try and strike a deal with Trump, just especially given how unpredictable he is. So, you know, we've seen in the past that he likes to strike these deals with various countries, and then those deals can be torn up quite quickly. So others think that perhaps we maybe should have prioritized striking deals with other parts of the world. But then again, just given the turmoil in the UK, I think there was quite a bit of pressure to try and get a deal done. So we'll see how this plays out.
In the meantime, David, the Financial Times, it says Beijing has found fault with the tariff deal signed between the UK and the US. Do tell us why, and what has been the response from the British government?
So this all basically comes down to some of these quite key and subtle sub-clauses in this new deal between, let's say, the UK and the US. So basically, the US wants very heavy oversight of the UK's supply chains for products using steel and cars, which we're shipping lots of to the US. And China, who basically make a lot of components, which, for example, go into UK-made cars, they quite rightly suspect that this is a very subtle way from the US of squeezing them out, which would be a huge blow to their industry. And so they're very worried about their involvement just basically becoming a lot limited in UK manufacturing. So they've hit back. Chinese representatives, I think earlier this week, they called the clauses of the deal poison pills and said that they were worse than tariffs. And this has also come at quite a critical time for UK-China relations. So about 10 years ago, like UK-China relations were quite warm, but they've been tense now for a good 5-6 years. But with the UK's economic struggles, the UK's been trying to get a little closer to China. The Chancellor visited Beijing earlier this year, but things have quite markedly deteriorated since then in the last couple of months. But last month, the UK government took back control of a steel factory here, which had been owned by the Chinese, and now this deal has happened. So I think any prospect of UK-China relationships sort of starting to warm again is probably quite distant now after what's happened.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Stephen, back here in Korea, following talks with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer in Jeju last week, Industry and Trade Minister An Dok-keun claimed that the deadline for a tariff deal with the U.S. was quite tight. Do you share this sentiment?
I would just preface this answer by saying that the situation is quite fluid and things are changing all the time. So this sense of urgency or the sense of time-boundness that negotiators are feeling right now could change just because anything could change with each passing day. If there's one thing that we know about the Trump administration's approach to these tariffs is that they are willing to change them and that they don't have, by any appearances, a very thoroughly thought out and planned and rigorous approach to all this. They're kind of making decisions as they go along, shall we say. So, but the backdrop of all of this is the domestic fluidity in South Korea, the fact that South Koreans will vote in a presidential election on June 3rd. That will, we don't know exactly, but it could see a change in power. There will definitely be a new government in power, but we don't know if they will be representing one side or the other. And that tends to result in changes to the bureaucracy. It tends to result in differences of vision on the ministerial level and elsewhere. So that's all up in the air. I mean, if I had to, guess as to what the internal thinking in the government is on this right now, is there is a lot of bipartisan consensus in South Korea on the importance of maintaining South Korea's soundness as a successful exporter. And the relationship with the U.S. is a key part of that. So one thing that I cannot imagine the two sides bickering too much over is the need to be able to seamlessly and effectively negotiate with the U.S. So as to Minister An's claim that July 8th is the deadline and that is fixed, I don't know enough about what's happening behind the scenes to comment on the wisdom of adhering to that as a hard and fast deadline. I would advise anybody who's watching this to just bear in mind that this is an issue of great importance to South Korea, and I think they'll do everything they can to reach a favorable result.
Right, of course, as an export-oriented country and economy. David, there have been reports of Mr. Trump's tariff campaign fueling a strong anti-American sentiment in some places. What is the sentiment there in the UK?
Well, I think that, I guess the headline is that the special relationship isn't quite so special anymore. I mean, I think I saw some surveys saying that only a third of the UK really believes that we have close ties with the US anymore. You know, I mean, I think a lot of this is just coming from British people, even those who support Trump, but just being quite worried that the ongoing tariff situation is going to impact the economy even more and impact their personal finances. You know, we're having like sort of a rising cost of living here, like sort of in the UK, and that has really been the case ever since the Russia-Ukraine war kind of broke out. So that's kind of the backdrop to this. I think probably like perceptions of the US and the UK are still better than in the rest of Europe, but I think we're already seeing, you know, some signs of even boycotts of US products from people who feel particularly strongly about this. I read a New York Times article which kind of said that some people in the UK and Europe were starting to boycott Tesla cars, McDonald's. Some people have even been deleting their subscriptions to Netflix and Disney. So, I mean, I think it's quite a sign that just here in the UK and more broadly across Europe, you know, particularly Denmark with all of Trump's kind of ongoing posturing over Greenland, you know, feelings about the US, you know, kind of aren't what they were, basically.
Right, and staying with this, Stephen, as a Canadian journalist working here in Asia, what can you share with us about the anti-American sentiment over in Canada?
All right, here's where I need to choose my words very carefully. I would say anti-American sentiment is maybe a kind of harsh way of putting it, because I think it's a multifaceted and complex kind of thing. I don't think it's that Canadians are anti-American exactly. Like we're talking about two countries that have, you know, arguably the most fruitful and successful mutual trading relationship of any two countries on earth. There are tons of Canadians who work in the United States and who have family in the United States and vice versa. And there's all this interchange. I think what struck a nerve in Canada is there has always been this, I guess I could say, an imbalance in that as the much smaller country, Canadians spend every day of their lives thinking about the United States, whether they want to or not. I grew up watching American television. We listen to American music. We watch American movies. A lot of what we, you know, our consumer goods in our stores come from the United States. But the average American person does not spend any of their life thinking about Canada, because it is just such a smaller country. And like, unless you live in the border area, it's just not really on your radar. I mean, it's different now that Canada has had some super high-profile celebrities in the United States. You know, Drake and Justin Bieber and some others have put us on the map. But like, I remember when I was young going to the United States and telling people that I was from Toronto, which is a pretty big city, and them saying, what state is that in? They'd never heard of it. So there is this sense of Canadians, I think, are quite sensitive to feelings as though they are being condescended to by the U.S. And so when Trump came out and said that he wanted to make Canada the 51st state, and you know, just failing to recognize Canada as a sovereign and unique place with its own identity that is distinct from the United States, I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And so that has led to, I mean, arguably it flipped the results of the federal election that took place in recent months. You know, you had the Conservatives who looked set to cruise to a fairly easy victory, and that all changed. The Liberals were able to retain their control on the government, and the consensus among analysts was that it was because they took a more, you know, they stood up to the U.S. a little bit more, and then they, you know, kind of channeled this sense that Canada is a unique place that would not be taken over by its much larger neighbor. And now there is, you know, boycotts and all kinds of things like that. mean, I don't know how long it will last, but the lesson that I would take from this, the lesson that, like, as someone who grew up in Canada, that I would seek to impart to an international audience is that I didn't find any of this surprising, because I'm very well aware of this latent sense of, I mean, I guess you could say it's a little brother complex or something to that effect, like this very acute sense of, like, being in a close relationship with someone who is a lot more powerful than you, and wanting to engage with that partner on a mutually respectful basis. So what we're calling a rise in anti-American sentiment, it's not new, but it is the spike in it is what I think will be a kind of temporary response to a temporary phenomenon, and hopefully sooner than later the two countries can get back to business as usual and get back to the mutually beneficial relationship that they've had.
Hopefully, of course, hopefully. Yes. Meanwhile, David, amid these concerns over America's trade policy, I hear the UK and the EU sealed a landmark deal to reset relations post-Brexit. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular deal and its broader implications?
Well, I think this is quite interesting. I mean, I think this is maybe one of the few good things which have come out of the tariff war. You know, they're calling it the big reset here in the UK. It's sort of pushed us and the EU kind of back a little closer together again. Because, you know, obviously since Brexit, the relationship has never quite been the same. But we've now struck this new deal to work together on security, defense, and various forms of energy trade. The energy aspect is quite big. Like in the UK, we've had spiraling energy costs in the last 3 years, you know, ever since that kind of the Russia-Ukraine war broke out. So the UK is now kind of like being reintegrated back into the EU's energy market, and that could be good news for consumers here in terms of hopefully perhaps falling bills again. And obviously, quite crucially, in terms of a broader spectrum, there's this new security and defense partnership, which is a big kind of step forward in rebuilding that relationship between the EU and the UK. So it's quite a wide-ranging deal. It's quite similar to the deal which the EU has signed with Japan and South Korea. And so it's a bit of an opening of the door to kind of cooperation again on a high level between, let's say, the UK and the EU. So, you know, I do think that this is a huge positive, definitely. We're starting to become closer together again, like so with the EU for the first time in quite a long time.
All right, and staying with regional efforts then, Stephen, what are the prospects of a similar regional deal on trade among Seoul, Tokyo and Beijing, do you think?
Those are three, you know, big, important countries with, you know, very unique ways of operating internationally. I think on one level, the administrations in all of those countries would like to find ways that would allow them to trade more freely. You also have a lot of variation in, like, the way that each of those countries tends to dominate particular industries. I mean, maybe it will, once we have clarity as to the composure of the government here in Seoul, that might be something that they could look to discuss again. There's definitely a lot to gain, I think, by having some more free movements of goods and of people, maybe having some visa regulations eased. But at the same time, those are three countries with very complicated relationships and history and, you know, some amount of suspicion on certain parts. So it's definitely something that I think the government would look at, but I for one, am not going to hold my breath just yet.
Right. But as you mentioned earlier, pundits are saying cooperation to a great extent would be much better than confrontation here in this part of the world.
As everywhere else.
Right, for sure.
Can't we all just get along?
Right. All right, Stephen, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And David, over in the UK, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end of Press Perspective for today. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow for more panel discussion.